right. Well, we have time, I think, for one more caller. We have Sven, any pronouns, is giving us a call from Washington and wants to talk about mathematics and abstract concepts. How are you, Sven?
Happy
Oh,
Sunday. I'm well. How are you guys?
yeah, we're good. We're good. I think we have chatted once or twice before. We always seem to have some cool chats. What are you thinking about today? What's on your mind, Sven?
Awesome. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. And Richard, I believe we've spoke before as well. Good to see you
Yeah, I
again.
believe so. Yeah.
But I was checking out The Mathematical Experience by Davis and Hirsch, and they were a quote kind of caught my eye that I thought I'd bounce off you guys. And that was that the working mathematician is a Platonist 6 days a week and a formalist on Sundays. And that just basically goes to show that, like, they don't care to discuss why they're working with abstract concepts as if they are real. And I kind of find that to be true of the materialist. Like this, the sense we've talked before to just wash these away as nonsense ideas, but they are ideas that are allowing science to do its work.
Yeah, and I've had this similar discussion where basically a very devout religious person or somebody that's very engrossed in supernatural things has said to me something along like my response to something about like ghosts or something is like, like, well, we don't really have any good evidence for that. And normally the way that conversation goes is all the way back to these very most foundational things. And it's like, well, we don't actually have proof that the real world is out there. And it's like, yeah, I guess that's true. And it's like, well, you don't actually have any proof that your senses aren't constantly deceiving you. And it's like, yeah, I guess that's true. And it's like, okay, well, also we don't have like foundations for math or logic or anything. And it's like, yeah, all that's true. I grant all of that. I don't find that to be as big of a problem as other people do. Like the idea of math just being an abstract concept and not being like a physical thing, right? That doesn't bug me because I take the approach of it seems to be the case that we all have to deal with these 4 or 5 or 7 or 12 or there's a set of numbered things out there that we just don't really have good information or evidence for. And we may just never be able to. Like there may just never freaking ever be a way to prove that the outside world exists. Like this could all just definitely be a figment of my imagination. Um, but the question is, do we all have to play that same hand? And if we do, if we're all in the same boat of saying none of us have a good grounding for logic, none of us have a good grounding for any other minds existing, then as long as we don't add anything else on top of that, we're all playing the same game by the same rules. If we start adding things on top of that, that's where I think the problems come in. Because, hey, Elliot, you can't say you always need evidence for stuff. You can't say you always need scientific evidence because logic. Well, yeah, I agree. Do you have scientific evidence for logic? No. Okay. So then that's our one thing. That's the one thing that we're both allowed to just assume from the beginning and move on. Because if we don't, we can't make any progress. So once we've nailed down what those things are, then we can talk about adding those others where the soul or a perfect form of things. I mean, all kinds of different aspects, Reiki, I guess. But I know I've been rambling. Richard, what are your thoughts on this? Math being abstract, how that relates to like materialism and stuff. Is this a problem?
It's
What do you
not a
think?
problem. If you threw me off by jumping into odd solipsism because that's not somewhere I was going to go into.
I'm constantly unconvinced about your existence, Richard. I don't know why. I'm sorry.
I think yeah, for me, abstract concepts aren't a problem. I don't know why some kind of people who believe in the religious or the supernatural kind of think it is a problem. For people for atheists particularly, it's not a problem. For me, maths appears to work. logic appears to work, and you can test it. Math appears to work in the real world, and we can test that math appears to work in the real world from the kind of the basic level of adding 2 plus 2. You can take physical objects and put that into practice to see if that actually works, and yes, it appears to work. Down to the kind of the abstract level, and when we come to abstract concepts, one of the kind of most difficult, even for mathematicians, is and logisticians, is infinity. And I think, even where that's concerned, it appears to work. In fact, when, I think it was Cantor who showed that many infinities could exist, and it actually caused such huge problems in the kind of ideas of thought, and not just in thought, but in physics and things like that. The constructivist mathematics was kind of defined exactly to control how infinities were used. And so even at the more complex levels, it appears to work. And I think, I don't see why anybody would have a problem with that at all. I find, why would anyone have an objection to abstract things being real or existing? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Sven?
Yeah, shout back to us.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned a game, secular, because there was talk of set theory and how our use of mathematics could be described as just rules of this universe. But to take that stance, you would have to accept that there are other universes that can obey other rules. And so if we
Or at least
ignore
potentially.
that, what's that?
No, I was just adding in, at least you would have to grant that it's a potential for other universes to have different rules. Like, yeah.
Correct. But until we have proof that these are just axiomatic rules that follow from this game that we call the universe, then I do not see why it is out of, I full hard agree. We always end up agreeing. We do need to use these rules. We need to play the same game. But I think the separation is that you are just we'll accept these 7 games and play the game. But the spiritualists and the theists are going to say, well, no, we want to understand why are there rules like that? And what does it mean to have those rules? Why would there be rules to a universe at all?
I'm glad you mentioned deists.
You asked about these rules.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned deists, because when I've just brought up infinities a minute ago, and one thing that infinities is related to is quantum electrodynamics. And John D. Barrow, who's a science communicator and also a deist, he says it's the best theory in the whole of science. And I think that's something to take into account. We've got to be very careful when we have these conversations. Sometimes we might come from opposing opinions, but we've got to be very, very careful not to strawman people and put everybody into one category. There are some very, very good scientists who are deists and theists and understand the principles that we're talking about. And where they can strawman us, we can also strawman them. And I think it's very, very important not to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And just real quick, Sven, to kind of jump off, you had said, kind of this distinction with the spiritualist or the deist is coming more a little bit more of the angle of why are there these rules at all, for this game, this universe, right? This isn't anything scientific, this isn't anything mathematical or anything, but this is just what pops into my head when those thoughts come up, is well, there has to be something. There has to be some kind of order of some kind, because otherwise complete and total chaos just isn't anything that we can really. It's kind of like the philosophical nothing. Like the broadest of concepts of complete chaos and randomness seems to not allow for anything, because if it's always going to be random at every single second, how do you ever have mass? How do you ever have you know, houses. Like the house will just disappear out of nowhere because there's no rules for logic or gravity or anything. Like, right? Like it'll just disappear and be replaced with a unicorn or something. Like what, you know, like there has to be some kind of rule. Like maybe it's not, maybe we don't understand it, or maybe there are ways that it can change and stuff, but it kind of makes sense to me that if there's going to be anything at all, there has to be at least some order, you know? But again, I think these topics are fun topics to discuss, and I think they're good for us to clash on, because I think it does help us progress our scientific thought, and we look at different avenues and we say, well, maybe this or maybe that. Um, just a lot of times for claims, I'm gonna need to see something empirical in addition to some other thing. You want to give me a beautiful logical syllogism? I love it. I love it. I love it. I'm all here for it. Um, but if that's it, if that's kind of where we end, then for me it seems reasonable just to say, okay, well, logically that seems to work, but what's the demonstration of any of these premises in reality? And I get that for some people that just isn't where they want to go. They just don't care if there is that demonstration. If it's you know, logically valid, we're good to go. But yeah, I do enjoy these conversations. Richard, is there anything else before
Yeah,
we?
I just want to piggyback on what you've just said, actually, because I think I don't think I've ever come across a philosophical syllogism doesn't that cannot be evidenced by empiricism in some way.
Mm,
And you know, I've thought quite long and hard about this, and there just doesn't seem to be one. And you can talk about pure logic all day long, but at the end of the day, it seems to be demonstrated by reality. It seems to be demonstrated by empiricism at every step of the way. And that's not to say that it's not a thing and it's not important, because it's very important, and it can ask questions that can advance science, and has advanced science, and allows us to use empiricism to try and find these answers. But I don't think that, in my experience, there even is a purely philosophical syllogism you could use for anything. Sven, I love talking to you. Always love your calls.
yeah,
Is
we
there
always.
anything else you'd like to respond with
Yeah.
before we let you go?
Yeah, I appreciate you both. I am also just trying to expand my knowledge, so I appreciate this conversation, and have a wonderful day.
Yeah, you too, Sven.
You too. Thank you.